My name is Thomas and I'm 53 years old. After 22 years of marriage, I thought I knew everything about my wife, Sarah. I was wrong, dead wrong. What I discovered about her would shake the very foundation of everything I believed about trust, love, and the woman I shared my bed with for over 2 decades. It all started in March of last year. Sarah came home from her job at the marketing firm with tears in her eyes and her shoulders slumped in defeat. I was in my home office, reviewing quarterly reports for my accounting practice, when I heard her car pull into our driveway in suburban Denver. The sound of her heels clicking against the hardwood floor seemed slower than usual, more deliberate, like each step carried the weight of bad news. "Tom," she called out, her voice cracking slightly, "can you come here for a minute?" I saved my work and walked to the living room, where she was sitting on our beige leather couch, still in her navy blue business suit. Her auburn hair was slightly disheveled, and her makeup was smudged around her eyes. In all our years together, I'd rarely seen Sarah look so defeated. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked, settling down beside her and placing my hand on her knee. She took a shaky breath. "They let me go today. Budget cuts. The entire marketing department got downsized." Her voice broke on the last word, and she buried her face in her hands. My heart sank. Sarah had worked at Morrison & Associates for 8 years. She'd climbed from a junior marketing coordinator to senior campaign manager, and she was damn good at her job. The clients loved her, and she'd brought in some major accounts over the years. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into my arms. "This is their loss, not yours. You'll find something even better." But as the weeks turned into months, Sarah's job search seemed to hit one dead end after another. She'd come home from interviews looking defeated, talking about how competitive the market was, how companies were looking for younger candidates or people with different skill sets. She started talking about maybe going back to school, getting some certifications, updating her LinkedIn profile. Meanwhile, our financial situation began to tighten. Sarah's unemployment benefits helped, but they were a fraction of her previous salary. She'd been making about $75,000 a year, and suddenly that income was gone. I was doing well with my accounting practice, bringing in around $90,000 annually, but losing Sarah's income meant we had to make some adjustments. The first sign something was off came in June. We were at our favorite restaurant, Romano's Italian Bistro, celebrating our wedding anniversary. It was a place we'd been going to for special occasions for years. The owner, Giuseppe, always greeted us like family and made sure we got the best table by the window overlooking the small garden they'd created in the back. When the check came, I reached for my wallet, but Sarah quickly grabbed it first. "Let me get this," she said. "You've been carrying all the financial weight lately. I got a small freelance gig last week." I was touched by the gesture, but also curious. "What kind of freelance work?" "Oh, just some social media consulting for a local boutique. Nothing major, but it's something." She handed her card to the waiter before I could protest. Over the next few months, these small gestures became more frequent. Sarah would insist on paying for groceries sometimes, or she'd surprise me with small gifts, a new tie, a book I'd mentioned wanting to read, coffee from that expensive roastery downtown. When I asked about it, she always had an explanation. Another small freelance project. She'd sold some old jewelry. A friend had paid back a loan, but something didn't add up. I'm an accountant by profession and by nature. Numbers are my language, and the numbers Sarah was giving me didn't make sense. Unemployment benefits in Colorado max out at around $600 a week. Even with occasional freelance work, she shouldn't have had much disposable income, yet she was contributing to household expenses and making these spontaneous purchases. I didn't want to seem controlling or suspicious, so I kept my concerns to myself. Sarah had always been independent with her finances. We'd maintained separate personal accounts alongside our joint household account, which had worked well for us over the years. If she wanted to surprise me occasionally, who was I to question it? But the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. The breaking point came in late August. I was working late in my office when my computer crashed. I'd been putting together a complex tax projection for a client, and I was terrified I'd lost hours of work. My laptop was being repaired, so I decided to use Sarah's computer to see if I could recover my files from our shared cloud storage. Sarah was at her book club meeting, something she'd been attending religiously every Thursday evening since losing her job. She said it gave her a sense of routine and social connection during a difficult time. I thought it was healthy for her to maintain those relationships. Her MacBook was on the kitchen counter, plugged in and charging. I opened it and entered the password. Our wedding date, same as always. The screen lit up, and I navigated to the cloud storage. But as I was scrolling through the files looking for my tax documents, something caught my eye. There was a folder labeled Personal Finance that I'd never seen before. Curiosity got the better of me. I know I shouldn't have opened it. Privacy is important in a marriage. But something compelled me to click on it. What I found made my blood run cold. Inside were screenshots of stock portfolios, bank statements, and investment accounts I'd never heard of. The numbers were staggering. Sarah had accumulated over $400,000 in various investment accounts. There were screenshots of her Robinhood account showing day trading activities, a Schwab brokerage account with blue-chip stocks, and even cryptocurrency holdings worth tens of thousands of dollars. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the timeline. The documents showed that she'd been building these portfolios for years, long before she lost her job. Some of the earliest statements went back to 2019, showing consistent deposits and investment activities. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through more files. There were tax documents showing significant capital gains that she'd never mentioned during our annual tax preparation sessions. As a CPA, I prepare our joint tax returns every year, and somehow these investment gains had never appeared on our filings. Then I found the smoking gun, a document titled Financial Independence Plan. It was a detailed spreadsheet outlining Sarah's strategy for accumulating wealth and achieving financial independence. The document was dated from early 2020, around the time the pandemic started. It outlined her plan to maximize her investment returns while minimizing household expenses by maintaining the appearance of financial struggle. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The room started spinning, and I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. Everything I thought I knew about my wife, about our marriage, about our financial partnership was a lie. The document went on to detail how she planned to use her temporary unemployment situation as cover for reducing her contributions to household expenses while secretly growing her investment portfolio. It even included calculations showing how much money she could redirect to investments by letting me shoulder more of the financial burden. But the cruelest part was the section titled Exit Strategy. It outlined how she could use her accumulated wealth to secure her financial future in the event of major life changes. The language was clinical, businesslike, but the implications were clear. She was planning to leave me, and she was systematically hiding assets to ensure she'd be financially secure when she did. I sat in our kitchen, staring at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. This was the woman I'd shared my life with for 22 years. The woman I'd supported through her mother's cancer diagnosis, through her career changes, through the miscarriages we'd endured when we were trying to have children. The woman who'd held my hand through my father's funeral just 3 years ago, and she'd been planning to betray me for years. The sound of her car in the driveway snapped me back to reality. I quickly closed the laptop and returned to my office, trying to compose myself. When Sarah came in, chatting about her book club meeting and how much she'd enjoyed discussing the latest novel they'd read, I could barely look at her. "How was your evening, honey?" she asked, kissing my cheek like she had thousands of times before. "Fine," I managed to say, "just working on some client files." But nothing was fine. Nothing would ever be fine again. I spent the next week in a haze of disbelief and anger. Every interaction with Sarah felt like a performance. When she complained about not finding work, I wanted to scream that she had more money than most people see in a lifetime. When she insisted on making budget-friendly meals to save money, I wanted to throw her laptop at the wall and show her the screenshots I'd taken with my phone. But I'm a methodical person. I knew I needed to gather more information before confronting her. If this was heading toward divorce, and it seemed like it was one way or another, I needed to document everything properly. I started paying closer attention to Sarah's daily routine. Her book club meetings on Thursdays were real. I confirmed that by calling the library where they met. But I noticed she was going out more frequently for other activities, shopping trips that seemed to take much longer than necessary, lunch dates with friends that stretched into the afternoon, coffee meetings with potential networking contacts that never seemed to lead anywhere. One Tuesday in September, she said she was meeting a friend for lunch at the Cherry Creek Mall. I decided to drive by on my way to a client meeting. I didn't see her car in the parking area as I checked, but Denver is a big city and I could have easily missed her. What I did notice was a pattern in her behavior when she came home from these outings. She'd always have a story ready, always with just enough detail to sound credible, but not so much that it could be easily verified. She'd gotten good at maintaining the performance. The real breakthrough came when I decided to do some detective work on our financial records. I requested copies of all our credit card statements and bank records from the past 2 years. What I found was a masterclass in financial deception. Sarah had been making strategic purchases and cash withdrawals that she'd then immediately deposit into accounts I didn't know about. She'd buy something expensive on our joint credit card, return it for cash, and then move that money into her secret accounts. She'd withdraw cash from our joint account for household expenses and then use her own money for those expenses while investing the withdrawn cash. The sophistication of her deception was breathtaking. She'd been essentially laundering money from our joint finances into her private accounts while maintaining plausible deniability for every transaction. But the most damning evidence was what I found when I hired a private investigator. I know it sounds dramatic, but I needed to know if there was more to the story. The investigator, a former police detective named Mike Rodriguez, was thorough and professional. What he discovered was that Sarah's job search was largely fictional. While she had gone on a few legitimate interviews in the early weeks after losing her job, she'd been turning down offers for months. She'd received at least 3 solid job offers, one paying even more than her previous position, but had declined them all using various excuses. More shocking was the discovery that she'd been meeting regularly with a divorce attorney named Patricia Chen. The meeting started in July, just a few months after she'd supposedly lost her job. Security camera footage from the attorney's building showed Sarah entering and leaving multiple times over the summer. Mike also discovered that Sarah had been renting a small storage unit across town where she'd been keeping documents and personal items. When he showed me photos of her accessing the unit, I felt another piece of my world crumble. She was literally moving pieces of her life away from our shared home. The final piece of the puzzle came when Mike followed her to what I thought was a book club meeting. Instead of going to the library, Sarah drove to an upscale apartment complex in Lodo, downtown Denver's trendy lower downtown area. She used a key to enter the building and went to a unit on the 3rd floor. Mike discreetly inquired with the building management and discovered that Sarah had signed a lease for a 1-bedroom apartment under her maiden name, Sarah Williams. She'd been paying rent on this place for 2 months, using money from her secret accounts. When I saw the photos of her entering and leaving what was essentially her escape apartment, I knew our marriage was over. The question was no longer whether Sarah was planning to leave me, it was when and how she planned to do it. I confronted her on a Tuesday evening in October. I'd spent the day organizing all the evidence I'd collected. Bank statements, screenshots of her investment accounts, photos from the private investigator, documentation of her meetings with the divorce attorney. I'd also consulted with my own attorney, Robert Martinez, who'd helped me understand my rights and options. Sarah came home around 6:30, carrying Thai takeout from our favorite restaurant. She was in a good mood, talking about a potential job interview she had lined up for the following week. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was still maintaining the charade, even as I was preparing to expose everything. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Something in my tone must have alerted her because her expression immediately changed. The casual smile faded, and she set the takeout bags on the kitchen counter with deliberate care. "What about?" she asked, but I could see the wariness in her eyes. I opened my laptop and turned it toward her, showing the screenshots I'd compiled. "About your $400,000 in investment accounts. About your secret apartment downtown. About the divorce attorney you've been meeting with." The color drained from her face, but to her credit, she didn't try to deny it immediately. Instead, she sat down across from me at our kitchen table, the table where we'd shared thousands of meals over the years. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "About 2 months. The question is, how long have you been planning this?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally looked up, there was something different in her eyes. The mask she'd been wearing was gone, and I was seeing the real Sarah for the first time in years. "Since 2019, she said. "Maybe earlier. I don't know when exactly I made the decision, but I knew I needed to protect myself." "Protect yourself from what? From me? From our marriage?" "From being trapped," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Tom, we've been married for 22 years, and what do I have to show for it? What do I have that's really mine?" The question hit me like a slap. "Everything we've built together is yours. Our house, our savings, our life, it's all ours." "No, it's not," she said, shaking her head. "It's all tied up in joint accounts, joint ownership, joint everything. If something happened to this marriage, if something happened to you, where would that leave me? You could have talked to me about this. We could have worked something out. We could have set up separate accounts, separate investments. We could have had a conversation about financial independence instead of you lying to me for years." "Could we have?" she asked, and there was genuine pain in her voice. "Tom, you manage everything. You do our taxes, you make the investment decisions, you decide what we can afford and what we can't. When was the last time you asked my opinion about our finances?" I opened my mouth to respond, but she continued, "I'm not saying you're controlling or manipulative, you're not. But you're an accountant, and you're good with money. So we just fell into this pattern where you handled everything. And I let it happen because it was easier. But somewhere along the way I realized I didn't have any real financial autonomy. So you decided to steal from our joint accounts to build your own portfolio." "I didn't steal," she said, her voice hardening. "I redirected money that would have been spent on household expenses. I lived more frugally. I found ways to save money, and I invested the difference. While lying to me about being broke, while letting me think you were struggling to find work when you've been turning down job offers." She flinched at that. "You found out about the job offers." "I found out about everything, Sarah. The apartment, the divorce attorney, the secret storage unit. I hired a private investigator." The silence that followed was deafening. We sat there, 22 years of marriage reduced to a confrontation across our kitchen table, surrounded by the evidence of her deception. "I never meant for it to go this far," she finally said. "When I lost my job, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to accelerate my plan. I thought maybe I could build up enough of a safety net that I'd have options, real options. Options to leave me. Options to choose," she corrected. "To choose to stay because I wanted to, not because I had to. Tom, do you have any idea what it's like to feel financially dependent on someone else, even someone you love?" I thought about her question. As a man who'd always been the primary breadwinner, who'd always been in control of our financial decisions, I realized I probably didn't understand. But that didn't excuse the years of lies and deception. "I might not understand that feeling," I said, "but I understand betrayal. I understand what it's like to discover that the person you trust most in the world has been systematically deceiving you." Tears started flowing down her cheeks. I know what I did was wrong. I know I should have talked to you instead of all this. The divorce attorney, Sarah, you've been planning to divorce me." She nodded slowly. "I was exploring my options. Patricia Chen was helping me understand what a divorce would look like, what I'd be entitled to, how to protect the assets I'd accumulated." "Assets you accumulated using money from our joint accounts?" "Yes," she whispered, "and the apartment. I wanted to know I had somewhere to go. I wanted to know I could take care of myself." We talked for hours that night. Not argued exactly, but had the most honest conversation we'd had in years. Sarah explained how she'd felt increasingly suffocated by our financial arrangement, how she'd begun to resent being dependent on me for major decisions. She talked about watching her friends go through divorces and seeing how unprepared they were, how they'd given up their financial autonomy and paid the price when their marriages ended. I tried to explain how betrayed I felt, how the deception had broken something fundamental between us, The lying hurt almost more than the money. If she'd wanted financial independence, we could have worked something out. If she'd been unhappy in our marriage, we could have tried counseling. But the years of systematic deception felt like a betrayal of everything our relationship was supposed to be built on. By the time we finally went to bed, in separate bedrooms for the first time in our marriage, we'd agreed on a few things. First, the marriage was probably over. Too much trust had been broken, and we both recognized that. Second, we'd try to handle the divorce with as much dignity as possible. And third, we needed to sort out the financial mess she'd created. The next few months were a blur of lawyers, mediators, and financial advisors. The question of how to handle Sarah's secret assets became the central issue in our divorce proceedings. My attorney argued that since she'd used money from our joint accounts to fund her investments, those gains should be considered marital property. Sarah's attorney argued that since she'd reduced household expenses and used her own ingenuity to generate the returns, she should be entitled to keep them. The judge ultimately ruled that the source of the invested funds needed to be traced and accounted for. A forensic accountant spent weeks going through our financial records, determining what percentage of Sarah's investments came from joint funds versus her own income and savings. In the end, Sarah was allowed to keep about 60% of her accumulated wealth, the portion that could be traced to her own income and legitimate savings. The remaining 40% was considered marital property and was split between us. The house was another complicated issue. We'd paid off the mortgage years ago, and the property was worth about $500,000. Sarah's attorney argued that since she'd contributed to household expenses and mortgage payments over the years, she deserved her share. My attorney pointed out that she'd also been systematically reducing her contributions while hiding assets. We eventually agreed to sell the house and split the proceeds, minus the amount she'd diverted from joint accounts. It was a complicated calculation, but it felt fair given the circumstances. The divorce was finalized in March, almost exactly a year after Sarah had supposedly lost her job. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Looking back now, several months after everything was settled, I've had time to reflect on what went wrong and what I might have done differently. Sarah wasn't entirely wrong about our financial dynamic. I had taken control of most of our financial decisions, partly because I was good at it, and partly because she seemed content to let me handle it. But I never considered how that might feel from her perspective. At the same time, the way she handled her concerns was inexcusable. The years of deception, the systematic hiding of assets, the fake job search while planning to leave. It destroyed any possibility of saving our marriage. Even if we'd been able to work through the financial control issues, I don't think I could have ever trusted her again. The most painful part wasn't losing the money, or even losing the marriage. It was losing the person I thought I knew. The Sarah who used to tell me about her day over dinner, who'd curl up next to me on the couch while we watched movies, who'd laugh at my terrible jokes. That person turned out to be a performance. The real Sarah was someone who could look me in the eye every day while planning to betray me. I've been in therapy since the divorce, trying to work through the anger and betrayal. My therapist, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, has helped me understand that Sarah's behavior wasn't necessarily malicious. She was acting out of fear and a desire for security, even if she went about it in the wrong way. That understanding doesn't excuse what she did, but it's helped me move forward without being consumed by bitterness. I've also had to confront my own role in the breakdown of our marriage. While I don't accept responsibility for Sarah's deception, I do recognize that I could have been more attentive to her needs and concerns. I could have made more effort to include her in financial decisions and to understand her perspective on our money management. Sarah and I don't speak much now. We exchange brief texts about practical matters, the final paperwork from the house sale, tax documents, that sort of thing. But the woman who was my partner for over 2 decades is essentially a stranger now. Sometimes I see her around town and will nod politely if we make eye contact, but that's about it. She kept her apartment downtown and, as far as I know, has gone back to work in marketing. She did eventually take one of those job offers, working for a smaller firm but making good money. The private investigator tells me she seems to be doing well, though I stopped asking for updates months ago. What's the point? I've moved into a smaller place in a different part of Denver, closer to my office. It's a two-bedroom condo with a view of the mountains, and I like it. It feels like mine in a way our old house never quite did, probably because every room in that house held memories of our life together. The financial impact of the divorce was significant, but not devastating. Between my share of the house sale, the portion of Sarah's hidden assets that was awarded to me, and my ongoing income from the accounting practice, I'm comfortable. I'll need to work a few more years before retirement than I'd originally planned, but that's not the end of the world. The emotional impact has been harder to quantify. There are days when I'm angry all over again about the deception, about the wasted years, about the way our marriage ended. But there are also days when I feel a sense of relief, like I've been released from a performance I didn't even know I was giving. I've started dating again, though tentatively. It's strange to be in the dating world in your 50s, especially when you're carrying the baggage of a 22-year marriage that ended in betrayal. But my therapist keeps reminding me that not everyone is Sarah, and not every relationship has to end the way ours did. I've also reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with over the years. It's amazing how marriage can insulate you from other relationships, how you can become so focused on your partnership that you neglect the broader network of people who care about you. Going through the divorce reminded me how important those connections are. The most unexpected outcome of this whole experience has been a change in my approach to my accounting practice. Working with the forensic accountant during the divorce showed me how much I enjoyed the investigative side of financial work. I've started taking on more cases involving financial fraud and divorce-related asset discovery. It's challenging work, and it draws on all my skills as an accountant while adding an element of detective work that I find engaging. I've also become more proactive about discussing financial dynamics with my married clients. When I see couples where one person handles all the financial decisions, I gently suggest they might want to consider how to include both partners in major money decisions. I don't tell them about my own experience, and that wouldn't be professional, but I try to plant seeds about the importance of financial communication in marriage. One thing that still bothers me is how good Sarah was at the deception. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision or a brief lapse in judgment. She maintained an elaborate fiction for years, and she was convincing every step of the way. It makes me wonder what other things in our marriage were performances, what other aspects of the person I thought I knew were carefully crafted illusions. But I've also come to realize that dwelling on those questions isn't productive. The Sarah I knew, or thought I knew, was real in the context of our relationship, even if she wasn't the complete picture. The good times we had, the support we gave each other through difficult periods, the love we shared, those things were real, even if they weren't built on complete honesty. The hardest part of moving forward has been learning to trust my own judgment again. If I could be so completely deceived by someone I lived with for over 2 decades, how can I trust my ability to really know anyone? It's a question I'm still working through in therapy, and I suspect it will be a long-term process. But I'm learning that trust isn't binary. You don't have to choose between complete trust and complete suspicion. You can be open to relationships while still maintaining appropriate boundaries and awareness. You can love someone without being naive about their capacity for deception. I think about Sarah sometimes, especially on the anniversary of our wedding or other significant dates. I wonder if she's happy with the choices she made, if she feels like the financial security she gained was worth the cost of our marriage. I wonder if she regrets the deception, or if she still believes it was her only option. I'll probably never know the answers to those questions, and I'm learning to be okay with that uncertainty. Not every story has a neat resolution, and not every betrayal comes with a satisfying explanation or apology. What I do know is that I'm moving forward. I'm building a new life that feels authentic and sustainable. I'm working on being the kind of person who can form healthy relationships based on genuine communication and mutual respect. And I'm trying to learn from the mistakes of my marriage without letting them define my future. The experience has changed me, there's no doubt about that. I'm more cautious about financial matters, more attentive to the dynamics of power and control in relationships, more conscious of the importance of honest communication. But I'm also more appreciative of authenticity when I find it, more grateful for genuine connections, and more committed to being honest about my own needs and concerns. If I could go back and change things, would I? That's a question I've spent a lot of time thinking about. Obviously, I would want to address the financial communication issues in our marriage before they became a source of resentment for Sarah. I would want to be more attentive to her needs and more inclusive in our financial decision-making, but I don't think I would want to change the fundamental outcome. A marriage built on years of systematic deception wasn't sustainable, regardless of the underlying issues that motivated that deception. The trust that was broken couldn't have been repaired, at least not by me, and living with someone who could maintain such an elaborate fiction for years would have been its own kind of prison. The divorce was painful, expensive, and emotionally devastating, but it was also honest in a way our marriage hadn't been for years. And honesty, I've learned, is a prerequisite for any relationship worth having. As I write this, it's been over a year since the divorce was finalized. I'm in a good place professionally, financially stable, and slowly rebuilding my personal life. I'm not the same person I was when I discovered Sarah's secret portfolio, but I think I'm a better person in many ways. I've learned to value authenticity over comfort, honest communication over peaceful silence, and genuine partnership over the illusion of harmony. These aren't easy lessons, and they came at a high price, but they've made me more conscious of what I want in relationships and more committed to creating connections that are built on solid foundations. The woman I thought I knew for 22 years turned out to be partly fiction, but the person I'm becoming in the aftermath of that discovery is entirely real, and that feels like a victory worth celebrating. My name is Thomas, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones that force you to rebuild your life from the ground up. It's not the story I would have chosen, but it's my story, and I'm finally at peace with how it ends.